Okay, let's walk through that. Let's go back to 2015. So Justin Trudeau was invited by the mavens of the Liberal Party at the end of the, correct me if I've got any of this wrong, by the way, at the end of the Harper term. Harper had been running the country for a substantial period of time. And it's pretty typical for Canadians to throw out whoever's in charge on about a 10-year basis. And so many Canadians felt that it was time for change. And the Liberal Party was in some degree of disarray, and the powers that be went to Justin Trudeau. And I had some real trouble with that right at the beginning. And so I'd kind of like your opinion about that. I'm not a fan of Mr. Trudeau, and so I may have a very biased perspective, but I'd like to at least be accurate in my suppositions. My sense was that he had no right to put himself forward in a fundamental ethical sense. He had no right. He did as a Canadian, obviously, because the only thing that Justin had going for him, apart from his attractiveness and his charm, which are both obvious, I would say, he had an extremely famous name. But I didn't think that he had the experience or the education to dare to take on a role like that. And then I was thinking, well, that's a bit harsh, because the Liberals did want someone who had name brand recognition, and fair enough. And he could have come to office and surrounded himself with real experts and learned like mad carefully, and perhaps, had he had the ability, became a stellar leader over some period of time. Although I didn't see much evidence of that either. So, and then he came out with this Sunny Ways campaign, and I think that really did capitalize on his charm and very effectively. And there was an optimistic mood in Canada at that point with regard to the possibilities of the new leadership. So you were also swept up, and that was reminiscent to me. I was quite young when his father first came to power, but there was a wave of Trudeau mania across the country because Pierre Trudeau Sr., obviously, was very charismatic and had that celebrity-like effect on the Canadian public that his son did. Okay, so now that's 2015, and Trudeau comes to power, and everybody's looking forward to having that happen. That's when you become parliamentary secretary. Now, you had let's say, a detailed plan for something that was quite practical and quite novel on the neuroscience side, let's say, and you produced a plan and you put it forward to Jerry Butts and you mentioned someone else at that point.
Katie Telford.
Right. And as far as you could tell, that was rejected out of hand, and you don't believe perhaps that it even got to Trudeau's desk. And although you were parliamentary secretary, you didn't have a close relationship with him. And so apparently you weren't even in a position to ask him whether or not he had seen this plan that you had spent some time detailing. Now, I think it would be useful to outline for us what the role of a parliamentary secretary is and what it was that you expected that didn't happen, and whether or not your expectations were actually realistic. And you said, you were disinclined to complain, and you laid out the reasons for that. So what's the typical, as far as you understand, how are the relations between a prime minister and his parliamentary secretary generally managed, and what is that role generally?
So typically what happens, and you could check the record, because I attempt not to say things that don't have receipts, is that a parliamentary secretary, especially to the prime minister, is sworn into Privy Council and has access to a breadth and depth of information that allows them to carry out their duties in a way that is fundamental to being able to have these meetings with individuals that are on high level securities. Although I had the security screenings from CRA, RCMP, CSIS, that was all done, but wasn't able to have those meetings. Now, when I looked at other relationships with the finance minister, Bill Morneau, and Francois Philippe Champagne, who was his parliamentary secretary, very close, very much constantly having conversations, constantly involved in the policy development, constantly involved in stakeholder engagement and relationships. So there's no gaps between what that minister is doing and what that parliamentary secretary is doing. There has to be a tight relationship. And as a first minister, as prime minister with the parliamentary secretary, there has to be an even tighter gap, because if there's any kind of ripples or spaces in between the other ministries, we need to be aware of that. We need to run a tight ship. We have a lot to do on the agenda. So making sure that you have someone that's not only competent, but has their ears to the ground, they know what is happening, is what I thought would be the relationship that I had. And I would say that maybe, I don't want to mislead anyone, maybe it was my fault that that relationship didn't go as well. The first meeting that I had with the prime minister was in December of 2015. And of course, everybody remembers that during that first administration, he had a 50-50 cabinet. And he came out and said, that this is the cabinet because it's 2015. Not because the people had merit, not because, I have an excellent lineup. He said it's because it's 2015. It was very disenfranchising. And I think it was very much flippant for someone who was a leader of a G7 country to just say, because it's 2015.
Okay, let me dive into that. Let me dive into that just for a sec, if you don't mind. Well, because that also struck me really hard. I spent a lot of time assessing the research literature on hiring and determining how you do that if you hire purely on merit, let's say. And merit is defined in relationship to the evidence you have that the people you're attempting to hire actually have the ability to do what that specific job requires. And there are various ways of determining that merit. You do a job analysis to find out what the job actually entails, and then you go through the person's history and you see if they have the experience and the raw ability. Okay, so now when Trudeau announced that 50-50 cabinet, because it was 2015, I thought something quite similar to what you thought. I thought first, hey, that's pretty damn flippant. And I thought second, you've done something there that's really not good, because only 25% of the members of the House of Commons were female. And that means you've reduced your applicant pool a priori by half. And so there's no way that you pulled the most, statistically speaking, purely, there's no possible way that you screened and pulled in the most qualified people into your cabinet. And you did that for show. And so, well, if you cut your applicant pool by half on arbitrary grounds, there might be other reasons to select people, but you had reasons as well. They might not have been the same as mine.
I did.
You had reasons for being irritated by that. So delve more for me, if you would, into why it put your teeth on edge.
Certainly. And I won't speak to sort of the skills of the individuals. I think he had a very competent cabinet around him. The thing that really struck me with because it's 2015 is because it was so flippant, because it was so, it made it seem like it was arbitrary, and it made it seem, as you said, for show. And so I went into that meeting saying to him that, look, I understand what my role here. I understand I'm the only one that looks like me. But what I said, and I quote, is, if I'm here to fill any gender or racial gap within your cabinet, I don't want this role.
Yeah, well,
I'm
that's
not about
one of the
that.
dangers. That is absolutely one of the dangers of gender and ethnicity selection, let's say, is that like I saw this at the universities all the time. I think it's a terrible thing to have happen around people who are from a minority background who are truly qualified. Because it's hard on them because they don't know why they're selected. And it's hard on everybody else because they don't know why they're selected. And so that's not fun.
It's not fun. And putting that forward right at the beginning, I wanted to put him on notice that I am smart. I'm more than capable. So use me for a particular role that you might have within this position as parliamentary secretary, but don't for a second think that I would be a token throughout your entire administration. That was the notice that I was putting him under with saying those words. And so after I said that, he said, you know what, Celina, do you trust my judgment? Dude, I met you like 5 minutes ago. So I said, no, I don't trust your judgment. I have no reason to. I've been married to my my partner for 17 years. I hardly trust his judgment most days. But I mean, I have to build a relationship with someone. I'm not going to lie to you and say that I trust your judgment. And I realized at that moment that the tension in the room got a little awkward.
Statements that Trudeau made about the composition of his cabinet and how he made that. And then second, because you were the only black woman in the entire House of Commons. And so the combination of those two things made it reasonable for you to wonder just what was going on and to make a statement. Now, if I was going to play the devil's advocate, I'd say, maybe, and I'm not saying that this is right, but because I really do want to go into this. So I want to do it in the in the harshest way possible so we get it straight. You might say, and I think you kind of alluded to this, given that you said that perhaps you put your foot forward wrong the first meeting. You might say if you were thinking about it strategically, you would have had a calm and somewhat contentless first meeting and just got to know each other a little bit before you put your foot down, so to speak, about the role you were going to play. But maybe not too. Maybe the right thing to do was to make your case right off the bat. There's no way I can tell. But you said that, but you were inclined to do that. And then you said that when you did it, the atmosphere in the room wasn't perhaps what you might have hoped for. So tell me what you saw. And he asked you to trust him, which is also, that's something you remember. And it's an event worthy of note, because the question is, what did he mean? Because you don't know him. Now, did he mean you should just trust him because he's Justin Trudeau and he's the Prime Minister of Canada? Or did he mean that you should start out by trusting someone if you're employed by them in a new role? Like, I don't know. What did you think?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not even sure that question is warranted on the first day. Like, do you trust my judgment on the first day? I know that your platform was built by a number of different people. It wasn't just you. Why are you even asking that question? Why are you asking that question of me? Do you think we could work together? Do you think we could achieve the objectives of our platform? Do you think that we're going to do right by Canadians with this particular mandate? Ask me those questions. I don't really care about your particular mandate. And it really speaks to ego, and it really speaks to a particular sense of awareness or lack thereof that was pretty evident right from the beginning. And if we think about this whole episode, me being in politics, has driven me into the PhD work that I'm doing right now on motivated cognition and understanding what motivates people, their self-appraisal, their self-enhancement, their self-verification. It was really in that moment seeing that everything that needed to align for Justin Trudeau at that moment needed to feed into his feelings or his motivation on self, what he felt about himself. And I came in and within that first 15 minutes of a meeting said, no, I'm not just going to arbitrarily fall into what you deem to be your methodology around your self-enhancement. That is not my role. My role is to represent the people of Whitby. My role is to make sure that we execute a mandate. And I didn't know that at the time, but it really spoke to the fact.
Didn't know what?
I didn't know at the time that probably that wasn't the best move to make, because I assumed that as his parliamentary secretary, as his right-hand person, that he would have wanted someone who was going to be honest. And I don't think that's what he wanted. He wanted someone to confirm a bias that he felt about himself or a lack of self-esteem that he felt about himself by saying, yes, I trust your judgment, Justin. I don't know you, but I'm going to say, yes, I trust you. I could have played that game. I didn't want to.